Hello and welcome to Cozy Mysteries channel, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today we dive into the fog-shrouded world of Victorian London with a brand new Sherlock Holmes adventure. Sherlock Holmes and the Victorian Killer. Settle in with your favorite brew as Dr. John Watson recounts this chilling tale of murder, deduction, and the indomitable spirit of justice. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more mysteries. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Visitor. Hello and welcome to Cozy Mysteries channel, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Pull your armchair closer to the fire, dear listener, for tonight Dr. John H. Watson invites you into the gaslit world of 1887 London, where murder wears the mask of accident and vengeance walks unseen through the fog. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a clue. It was a bleak November evening, the sort that wraps London in a damp shroud and turns every footstep into an echo of foreboding. The year was 1887, and I, Dr. John H. Watson, late of the Army Medical Department, had only recently returned to the familiar chaos of our rooms at 221B Baker Street. The fire crackled with reluctant warmth. Outside, the fog pressed against the window panes like a living thing, blotting out the stars and swallowing the distant cry of a coster's bell. Sherlock Holmes stood at the mantelpiece, his lean figure outlined by the flames. He had not touched his violin for fully 20 minutes, an ominous sign, for when Holmes was idle his mind was most dangerous to itself. A scatter of chemical apparatus littered the table, retorts, test tubes, and a spirit lamp still hissing faintly. The air carried the sharp tang of reagents mingled with the sweeter note of his favorite shag. I had just settled with the Evening Standard when the bell below rang with unusual violence. Mrs. Hudson's measured tread ascended the stair, followed by a lighter, hurried step that faltered upon the landing as though its owner feared to proceed. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," our landlady announced, her tone betraying rare perturbation. "She would give no card, only that the matter is one of life and death." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that sudden ferocity I had come to recognize. "Show her up at once, Mrs. Hudson. And pray, Watson, remain. I have a premonition this will interest you." The door opened fully, admitting a gust of cold, wet air and a woman cloaked from head to foot in black bombazine. Her veil was heavy, yet even through its folds I discerned a face of uncommon beauty marred by terror. She was perhaps 30, tall, and carried herself with the unconscious grace of one born to society. Yet her gloved hands trembled as they clutched a small reticule of Russian leather. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Her voice, though refined, shook like a leaf in an autumn gale. "At your service, madam." Holmes bowed with courtly precision. "This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, in whose discretion you may place absolute confidence. Pray compose yourself and be seated by the fire." She sank into the basket chair as though her limbs had turned to water. For a moment she seemed unable to speak. Only her eyes, dark and lustrous with unshed tears, moved ceaselessly about the room as if seeking escape from some invisible pursuer. Holmes waited in silence, his long, nervous fingers steepled beneath his chin. At length he spoke gently, yet with that quiet authority none could resist. "Madam, you have evidently suffered a severe shock. Watson, a little brandy, if you please." I hastened to comply, and the lady swallowed a mouthful with a gasp. Color returned faintly to her cheeks. "My name," she began at last, "is Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove. My husband, Sir Reginald Hargrove of Hargrove and Thorne, importers of Oriental silks, was found dead in his study at 9 o'clock this morning. The police pronounce it accidental death, a fall from the library steps while reaching for a book. But I know it was murder. Holmes leaned forward, the lethargy of an hour ago banished as completely as though it had never existed. Proceed, Mrs. Hargrove. Omit nothing, however trivial it may appear. She drew a long, shuddering breath. Reginald returned from the city yesterday in excellent spirits. He had concluded a most advantageous contract for Kashmiri shawls, enough, he said, to secure our fortune twice over. We dined at 8. He was cheerful, almost boyish. At 10, he retired to his study to examine certain samples that had arrived by the evening post. I went to my room. At 7 this morning, the housemaid found him. Found him. Her voice broke. Beneath the library steps, Holmes finished quietly. Neck broken, I presume? She stared at him in astonishment. How could you possibly know? Pray continue. There was no disorder, nothing to suggest violence. The steps were overturned, a volume of Gibbon lay open upon the floor, and Reginald lay so still. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips. But yesterday afternoon this was pushed beneath our door. From her reticule she drew a single sheet of paper folded small and sealed with black wax. No messenger could be traced. Holmes took it with eager fingers, holding it first to the light, then subjecting it to the scrutiny of his pocket lens. I observed his features sharpen. The note clearly possessed peculiarities that escaped my less practiced eye. "Read it, Watson," he said, passing it across. The paper was heavy, cream-laid, with a watermark I did not recognize. The message, penned in a bold, angular hand, was brief. "Your sins of the past shall catch you in the shadows. The idle remembers. Tonight the debt is paid." "No signature," I murmured. "Observe the ink," Holmes said. "Lamp-black mixed with a trace of indigo, common in certain districts of Calcutta. And the paper is manufactured at a mill in Whitechapel, which supplies only one stationer in London. Curious, is it not, that a threat penned on Whitechapel paper should find its way to a knighted gentleman in Belgravia?" Mrs. Hargrove wrung her hands. "There is more. 3 months ago, Reginald received another note. Similar words, same handwriting. He laughed at it, said it was some crank. But last week, Mr. Elias Thorne, his partner, was taken ill after dining at the club. The doctors called it gastric fever, but he died within hours. Poison, Mr. Holmes. And now Reginald—" Holmes sprang to his feet and paced the room with that silent, panther-like tread I knew so well. "Tell me of this idol mentioned in the note." My client hesitated. Years ago, when Reginald was in India, he acquired a small jade figure from a temple near Darjeeling. The priests were furious. They claimed it was sacred to Kaylee and carried a curse. Reginald brought it home as a curiosity. It has stood on his desk ever since. "And where is this idol now?" "Still in the study, untouched." Holmes clapped his hands together with satisfaction. "Excellent. Mrs. Hargrove, you have done wisely to come to me. Return home at once. Admit no one to the study until I arrive tomorrow morning. Watson, my hat and coat." Our visitor rose, steadying herself against the chair. "You will take the case?" "Most assuredly." "The game, my dear madam, is afoot." As the door closed behind her, Holmes whirled upon me, eyes ablaze. "Quick, Watson, the Bradshaw and my atlas. We must discover every ship that docked from Calcutta within the past fortnight. Mark the watermark again. Whitechapel Mill, yes. But the paper was cut with a blade that left microscopic serrations. And the wax. Burmese dragon's blood resin, unobtainable outside certain quarters of Limehouse. Somewhere in London, Watson, walks a man who has journeyed far to collect a debt of blood. Before this fog lifts, we shall know his name." He flung himself into his chair, reaching for the violin. As the first haunting notes of a Sarasate caprice floated into the night, I felt that familiar thrill course through my veins. Another duel of wits had begun, And once more Sherlock Holmes stood between London and the darkness that threatened to engulf it. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Fog. I awoke to find Sherlock Holmes already abroad in the sitting room, fully dressed in his mouse-colored traveling coat and close-fitting cloth cap. The fire had been freshly made up. On the table lay the remains of a breakfast he had evidently not touched. A large-scale map of London was spread before him, marked with curious red circles and pins. "Up at last, Watson?" he cried with that boyish enthusiasm which seized him when the scent was hot. "Excellent. We have not a moment to lose. The Hargrove residence in Belgravia awaits, and the fog is our ally." It was scarcely 7 o'clock, yet already the streets were astir. The fog, thicker than I had ever known it, reduced the world to a circle of 20 yards. Gas lamps burned like corpse candles. Cab horses loomed suddenly out of the murk, their breath steaming. We took a hansom, the driver muffled to the eyes, and proceeded at a walking pace down Baker Street, the wheels making no sound upon the softened wood pavement. Holmes was silent throughout the journey, his keen profile pressed to the window, absorbing every detail that the gloom revealed. I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts. At length we drew up before a handsome Georgian house in Wilton Crescent, its portico veiled in creepers now black with soot. The butler, a dignified personage named Gregson, admitted us with the hushed manner of one who moves among the newly bereaved. Mrs. Hargrove met us in the morning room, pale but composed. She wore deep mourning, the jet beads upon her gown catching what little light penetrated the fog-pressed windows. "You are punctual, Mr. Holmes," she said, extending a gloved hand. "The study has been locked since yesterday. Even the police have not disturbed it further." "Admirable," Holmes replied. "Lead on, madam." The study was on the first floor, a noble apartment lined with books from floor to ceiling. A spiral library ladder of polished mahogany still lay where it had fallen. Beneath it, the chalk outline of Sir Reginald's body remained upon the turkey carpet, a grim reminder that needed no words. Holmes paused upon the threshold, his eyes taking in the scene with that microscopic scrutiny which missed nothing. Then he sprang forward with the lithe grace of a bloodhound slipping its leash. First he examined the ladder. "Note, Watson," he murmured, running his fingers along the rungs. "The dust upon the upper steps is undisturbed save for one clear print of a stockinged foot, size 8, narrow, high instep. Sir Reginald wore boots, I observed from the mud in the hall. Someone climbed these steps without shoes." He dropped to his knees beside the chalk outline. "The body fell backwards, striking the occiput first. Yet observe the angle. The neck is broken cleanly between the third and fourth vertebrae. A fall from this height might produce such an injury, but rarely so precise. And here," he indicated faint bruises upon the carpet pile, "pressure marks from knees. Someone knelt here, Watson, after the fall." I felt the familiar thrill of the chase. "You mean the murderer arranged the scene?" "Precisely. But why the elaborate pretense of accident?" Holmes was already at the desk, examining the jade idol with his lens. The thing was exquisite, 6 inches high, carved from imperial jade, representing Cayley with 4 arms and a necklace of skulls. Its eyes were rubies that seemed to glow with malignant life. "Curious," Holmes muttered. "The dust upon the base is disturbed in a perfect circle. The idol has been moved recently and replaced with precision. And this," he pointed to a faint scratch upon the green surface, "made by a steel instrument. Someone attempted to pry out one of the rubies." A thorough search revealed more. In the grate lay the ashes of burnt paper. Holmes carefully extracted fragments bearing traces of the same indigo ink as the threatening note. Behind a row of ledgers, we discovered a concealed drawer containing a sheaf of letters, all in the same angular hand. The idol sees all. Return what was stolen, or blood will answer blood. Each letter was dated at monthly intervals, the most recent only a week old. Mrs. Hargrove, when shown these, turned pale. Reginald kept them locked away. He said they were from a madman, some priest he had offended in India. He laughed at them. Men have died for less than laughter at sacred things, Holmes observed grimly. We were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Lestrade, accompanied by 2 constables. The little detective's rat-like features peered from beneath his bowler. Mr. Holmes, meddling again, I see. Sir Reginald's death was accidental, coroner's verdict. No need for your theatrics. Holmes smiled thinly. Indeed? Then perhaps you can explain the stocking prints upon the ladder, the pressure marks of knees, the burnt threats in the grate, and the fact that Sir Reginald's watch stopped at 11:47 precisely, though the housemaid swears she heard him moving about until after midnight. Lestrade spluttered, but had no answer. As we left the house, Holmes paused in the area to examine the railings. See here, Watson. Scratches upon the iron, fresh. Someone climbed these recently using the fog for cover, and this... He plucked a thread from a spike. Silk. Dyed with indigo, our visitor from the east, I fancy. The fog was lifting slightly as we returned to Baker Street, revealing the sullen yellow disk of the sun. Holmes was in high spirits. We have the makings of a pretty case, Watson. A murdered baronet, a cursed idol, anonymous threats in Indian ink, and a murderer who climbs like a cat and kills with the precision of a thuggee. Before nightfall, I warrant we shall have more. Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove. Chapter 3. The First Clue. The afternoon post brought tidings that turned our investigation upon its head. I was sealing a letter to my old comrade Stamford when Holmes, who had been silent for an hour, suddenly flung down his lens and sprang to the window. A telegram, Watson, Lestrade's man. Mr. Elias Thorne, Sir Reginald's partner, died at his warehouse in Wapping not 2 hours ago. Supposed apoplexy. We are wanted at once. We reached the docks as the sun bled into the Thames, turning the fog the color of old bruises. Thorne and Hargrove's warehouse stood upon a narrow wharf, its windows blind with grime. A knot of constables kept back a crowd of dockers and lightermen, their faces lurid in the flare of bull's-eye lanterns. Lestrade met us at the door, his ferret eyes gleaming with reluctant excitement. Another accident, Mr. Holmes. Thorne was tasting a new consignment of opium. Pure stuff from Benares. Heart gave out, the doctor says. Nothing for you here. Holmes brushed past him without ceremony. The warehouse was a cavern of shadows stacked high with bales of raw silk and teak crates stenciled in Sanskrit. In the center, upon a counting-house desk, lay Elias Thorne, or what had been Thorne. His face was purple, eyes protruding, tongue blackened and swollen. A delicate porcelain bowl lay overturned beside an open ledger, a few grains of grayish powder still clinging to its rim. Holmes bent over the corpse like a stooping hawk. Note the petechial hemorrhages, Watson. Classic signs of asphyxia, yet no constriction of the throat. And this odor, bitter almonds beneath the opium. Prussic acid administered in minute quantity to mask the taste. Murder, Lestrade, as plain as the nose upon your face. He turned to the bowl, scraping the residue into a phial. Enough hydrocyanic acid here to fell an elephant. Someone knew Thorne's weakness for sampling the merchandise. A rapid search revealed more. Beneath the desk lay a scrap of paper identical to the threats received by Sir Reginald. The same cream-laid stock, the same angular script. The idol grows hungry. 2 debts paid. 1 remains. Holmes's eyes blazed. The 3rd victim is already marked. But who? In a locked storeroom we discovered the counterpart to Sir Reginald's jade Cayley, A second idol, larger, its four hands smeared with vermilion paste as though fresh from some unholy rite. Beside it lay a bundle of native clothing, a yellow robe, a crimson sash, and a pair of soft leather sandals crusted with Thames mud. "Size 8, Holmes murmured, comparing them to the print upon the library ladder. "Our murderer, Watson. He keeps the goddess with him, feeds her with blood as the thugs once fed her with strangler's cords." Lestrade snorted. "Superstitious nonsense. Probably some Lascar sailor with a grudge." Holmes ignored him. He was examining the ledger. Curious. Shipments from Calcutta, yes, but also from Rangoon, and one entry crossed out in red ink. Idle. Returned to temple. Refused. Someone attempted restitution and was denied. As we emerged into the fog, a boy darted from the shadows and thrust a note into Holmes's hand before vanishing. The same paper, the same hand. "You seek the goddess's servants. Look to the house where the first debt was born. Tonight the third blood falls." Holmes crushed the paper in his fist. "The killer grows bold. He taunts us, Watson, because he believes himself invisible. But every criminal leaves a footprint, even in fog." We returned to Baker Street through streets now glittering with frost. Holmes flung himself into his chair and filled his oldest pipe with the dottles of yesterday's smoke. "Consider the chain," he said, eyes half closed. "2 partners dead within a day. One thrown from a height, one poisoned by his own wares. Both threatened by identical notes. Both possessed idols stolen from the same temple. The third partner, there must be a third, lives in dread tonight." He sprang up and began ransacking his index. "Hargrove, Thorne, and Carstairs. Reginald Carstairs, silent partner, retired to Surrey. The telegram said nothing of him. Quick, Watson, the Bradshaw." But even as I reached for the railway guide, the bell rang violently below. Mrs. Hudson's voice floated up, shrill with alarm. Chapter 4, Suspects Emerge. The storm that broke over London that night was one of those elemental furies that seem sent to wash the very sins from the streets. Thunder rattled the window panes of Baker Street, and rain fell in solid sheets, turning gutters into rivers and drowning the gas lamps in hissing steam. Within our sitting room, however, a different tempest raged. Reginald Carstairs lay upon the sofa, pale as the sheet that covered him, his breath coming in shallow gasps. I had extracted a narrow-bladed kris from his left shoulder, Malayan curved and poisoned with some vegetable alkaloid that even now fought my antidotes. Holmes moved about the room like a restless ghost, his dressing gown hanging loose about his gaunt frame. "Pulse steadying," I reported, wiping my hands. "He will live if the poison does not return to the heart." Holmes scarcely heard me. He stood at the table, the 3 threatening notes arranged in a triangle around the jade cayley. In the lightning's glare, the idol seemed to writhe, its 4 arms beckoning. 3 partners, he said at last, all marked for death by the same hand. Yet the method varies: fall, poison, knife. Why the variation if the motive be simple vengeance? He whirled upon me suddenly. "Watson, the letters. Observe the progression of pressure. The first written with restraint, the second heavier, the third almost tearing the paper. Rage increases, the murderer grows careless." A knock at the door heralded Lestrade, dripping like a drowned rat. Behind him stood a tall, military-looking man with a scar across his brow. Colonel Sebastian Moran, late of the Indian Army, now Carstairs' brother-in-law. "Found this gentleman trying to force an entry at Carstairs' house in Surrey," Lestrade announced. "Claims he received a note warning him of danger. Thought we'd bring him along." Moran's eyes were bloodshot. "My sister telegraphed me in Bombay. Said Carstairs was behaving strangely, burning papers, talking of curses. I took the first steamer. Arrived to find the house ransacked and Carstairs gone." Holmes fixed him with that penetrating stare. You served with the 1st Bengal Fusiliers, Colonel? Curious. The kris that struck Carstairs is of Pathan workmanship. Herat, I believe. You would know such weapons. Moran stiffened. I know many weapons, Mr. Holmes, but I did not stab my brother-in-law. Holmes waved the denial aside. Naturally, yet someone did. Someone who knew the house, the habits of the partners, the very hour Carstairs would be alone. He turned to the idol, lifting it reverently. Notice, gentlemen, the base has been hollowed. A secret compartment. Empty now, but recently used. I found traces of powdered emerald inside. Someone removed something small. Perhaps a map, perhaps a list. Carstairs stirred upon the sofa, moaning. I bent over him as he opened his eyes. The priest, he whispered. Yellow robe, face painted black. He said the goddess demanded interest for 20 years. His gaze fell upon the idol and he shrieked, struggling to rise. Take it away. It watches, it watches. Holmes pressed him back gently. The priest, who is he? Speak, man. But Carstairs had lapsed again into delirium, muttering fragments in Hindustani. Lestrade cleared his throat. There's another suspect, Mr. Holmes. Servant at the warehouse, name of Ram Singh. Disappeared same night Thorne died. Lascar, temple tattoos on both arms. We're dragging the docks for him. Holmes smiled thinly. You will drag in vain, Inspector. Ram Singh is the bait, not the hunter. Observe. He produced a scrap of yellow silk from his pocket. Torn from the railings at Carstairs' house, identical to the robe in Thorne's storeroom. But the weave is Manchester cotton dyed in Limehouse. Our priest is no priest, but an Englishman who plays the part to perfection. He began pacing, the words tumbling forth like cards from a conjurer's sleeve. Consider the suspects, Watson. First, Colonel Moran. Motive. Carstairs married his sister for her fortune, then squandered it on idols and opium. Opportunity. Arrived in England yesterday. Means, familiar with Eastern weapons. Second, Mrs. Hargrove herself. Perhaps she discovered her husband's infidelity with an Indian dancing girl and hired vengeance. Chapter 5. A Midnight Pursuit. The storm had become a living thing, roaring about Baker Street like some primordial monster denied its prey. Rain lashed the windows in furious gusts, and the thunder rolled without pause, as though the very heavens protested the revelation that had just torn our little room asunder. Geoffrey Langdale, no longer Colonel Moran, glared up at us with eyes that burned with 20 years of hatred. The scar across his brow stood livid against skin the color of old parchment. His wrists were bound with Holmes's dressing-gown cord, yet even trussed he retained a serpentine menace. Holmes regarded him with the cold curiosity of a scientist observing a new specimen. So, Captain Langdale, he said softly, the Andaman cells could not hold you, nor the Bay of Bengal drown you. You have returned as Nemesis in yellow silk. Langdale's laugh was a dry rustle. You are clever, Mr. Holmes, but too late. 3 are dead. The goddess is satisfied. 3, Holmes repeated. Hargrove, Thorne, Carstairs. Yet Carstairs breathes still. Your blade was hurried, your poison diluted by Watson's promptness. The debt remains unpaid. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the prisoner's face. Holmes turned to Lestrade. Inspector, remove this gentleman to the yard, but first. He knelt and plucked a small object from Langdale's waistcoat. A jade amulet, twin to the idol's, warm from contact with skin. The 4th piece, he carried it as a priest carries the host. Lestrade had scarcely bundled the prisoner down the stairs when the bell rang again. 3 sharp pulls that cut through the storm like a knife. Mrs. Hudson's frightened face appeared at the door. A boy, sir, drenched through. Left this and ran. The note was sodden, the ink already running, yet the words were legible. The goddess lied. One debt was never theirs to pay. Meet me at the Temple of Cayley Limehouse, or the woman dies before dawn. Holmes's jaw set like granite. Eleanor Hargrove, he has her. The game is not ended, it has merely changed boards. We were in the street within minutes, cloaked and armed. The rain had turned every thoroughfare into a shallow river. Cabs were nowhere to be found. Holmes hailed a growler at last, shouting the direction above the gale. Limehouse Causeway. Double fare for double speed. The hansom lurched through the tempest, wheels hissing through floodwater. Lightning revealed glimpses of a drowned city, overturned barrows, constables huddled beneath capes, a beggar clinging to a lamppost like a shipwrecked sailor. Limehouse was a warren of opium dens and sailors' lodging houses, its alleys reeking of tar, gin, and eastern spices. We alighted at the causeway's end, where the Thames lapped black and hungry against the wharves. Holmes led the way with the sureness of one who had mapped these streets in his mind years ago. The Temple of Kali, he muttered. A deserted Hindu prayer house in Pennyfields. Langdale used it as his lair. We turned into a passage so narrow our shoulders brushed the walls. The rain here fell straight as a waterfall, drumming upon our hats. At the far end, a red lantern swung above a door painted with faded lotus blossoms. Holmes tried the latch, locked. Without hesitation, he put his shoulder to the rotten wood. The door gave with a splintering crash. We stumbled into a cavern of darkness lit only by a single oil lamp upon an altar. The scene that met our eyes froze the blood. Eleanor Hargrove lay bound upon a stone slab, her black gown spread like a funeral pall. Above her stood a figure robed in saffron, face painted bone white, eyes rimmed with kohl. In one hand he held a curved kukri, in the other the jade kali, its ruby eyes blazing in the lamplight. "Welcome, Mr. Holmes," the figure said in perfect English, the voice neither Langdale's nor any I knew. "You have brought the doctor. Good. He shall witness the final offering." Holmes's revolver was out in an instant. "Step away from the lady." The priest laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Shoot, and she dies first. The blade is poisoned. One scratch is enough." I saw then the terrible truth. This was not Langdale. The man we had bound was a dupe, a scapegoat. The real killer had always been one step ahead. "Drop the weapon," Holmes commanded, voice steady as steel. "Your game is finished." "Never." The priest raised the kukri higher. "The goddess demands the blood of the betrayer's seed. Eleanor Hargrove is with child, Sir Reginald's child. The line ends tonight." In that instant I understood everything. The variation in methods, the taunting notes, the yellow silk manufactured in Manchester. This was no thuggy fanatic, but an Englishman driven mad by jealousy and the lust for perfect revenge. Holmes's eyes never left the priest's. "You are Reginald Hargrove's half-brother," he said quietly. "Born on the wrong side of the blanket in Calcutta. Disinherited, forgotten, you followed the partners home and waited 20 years for your inheritance of blood." The kukri wavered. "How?" "Because only a Hargrove would know the idols contained the temple map showing where the partners buried the rest of the treasure. You needed Eleanor alive long enough to force the secret from her. Langdale was merely your tool, released from the Andamans with promises of vengeance, then framed for murders you committed yourself." The priest's painted face contorted with rage. He lunged, not at Eleanor, but at Holmes. The revolver roared. The kukri spun from a shattered wrist, clattering across the flagstones. The priest staggered back against the altar, saffron robes blooming crimson. We rushed forward. I cut Eleanor's bonds while Holmes pinned the wounded man. In the lamplight I saw the truth. Beneath the paint and kohl was the face of a young man. Scarred, emaciated, but unmistakably bearing the Hargrove nose and jaw. Name? Holmes demanded. Chapter 6. Hidden Secrets. Dawn found us still in that forsaken shrine of Cayley, surrounded by the wreckage of 20 years of hatred. The police surgeon had come and gone, pronouncing Julian Hargrove alive, but unlikely to see another sunrise. Eleanor Hargrove sat upon a broken teak chest, her morning gown torn and stained, yet her eyes held a strange new steadiness. Holmes moved among the shadows with the calm of a man assembling the final pieces of a puzzle carved from human bone. He had drawn the shattered fragments of the jade idol into a crimson silk cloth. Each shard caught the weak light like chips of frozen blood. "You knew," she whispered. "From the first moment in Baker Street, you suspected my husband's past concealed a brother." Holmes inclined his head. "I suspected a fourth presence, madam, but not the shape it would take. The notes were too intimate, details only a Hargrove would know. The exact hour Sir Reginald tasted his first opium pipe in Calcutta, the pet name he gave the idol, the hiding place of the temple map beneath the study floor. An outsider could never have learned such trifles." He knelt beside Julian, loosening the gag. The dying man's breath rattled like dry leaves. "Tell her," Holmes said quietly. "Tell the woman who would have been your sister-in-law why 3 men had to die for the sins of their youth." Julian's lips moved. Blood flecked them. "Father hadn't acknowledged me. On his deathbed, gave me a letter, promising half the Calcutta fortune. But Reginald burned it, said a bastard had no claim. They left me in the Andamans to rot with the chains," his eyes fever-bright fixed on Eleanor. "I watched you through the windows of Wilton Crescent, saw the child quicken. The line would continue, while mine ended in a prison hulk." A coughing fit seized him. Crimson spattered the flagstones. Holmes rose and crossed to a lacquered cabinet forced open during the struggle. From its depths, he drew a roll of vellum, yellow with age, marked with Sanskrit characters and a crude map. "The Temple of the Black Mother," he murmured. "The partners robbed it of more than idols. Here is the location of the buried temple treasure, emeralds, rubies, the dowry of a Maharani, worth a king's ransom. They divided the idols as tokens, but the map they entrusted to Sir Reginald alone." Eleanor Hargrove lifted her head. "Reginald kept a diary, locked in the wall safe. He wrote of nightmares, of a yellow-robed figure who stood at the foot of the bed. He thought it Conscience. Conscience wearing the mask of vengeance," Holmes corrected. He turned to me. "Watson, the dates. The first note arrived exactly 20 years to the day after the robbery. Julian's sentence began on the same date. Each murder fell upon an anniversary. Hargrove on the night he betrayed his brother to the police. Thorne on the date he perjured himself at the trial. Carstairs on the day he signed the transportation order." I felt the chill of perfect retribution. Julian stirred again. "Langdale was real. I freed him from the hulks, gave him clothes, money, a name. He killed the Lascar servant to perfect his disguise. But the blades, the poisons, those were mine." His laugh was a death rattle. "I wanted them to know every second or come who held their lives." Holmes's voice cut like a scalpel. "And the child? Would you have murdered an innocent for the crimes of its father?" Julian's eyes closed. "The goddess demanded a full accounting." Eleanor rose suddenly, walking to where the broken idol lay. She lifted the largest fragment, the face of Cayley, serene and terrible. "My child will never know this horror," she said, and dashed the jade against the altar steps. It shattered into glittering dust. Outside, the rain had ceased. A weak sun struggled through the fog, turning the Thames to molten brass. Lestrade arrived with a Black Maria. Constables lifted Julian onto a stretcher. As they carried him past Eleanor, she did not look away. "Tell him," she said to the police surgeon, "that the debt is paid. There will be no more blood." Holmes watched the van disappear into the mist, then turned to me with that rare expression which told me the case had cut deeper than he cared to admit. "Come, Watson, there is one final duty." We returned to Baker Street through streets now washed clean. The sitting room smelled of damp wool and gun oil. Holmes went straight to the mantel and took down the Persian slipper. From it he drew not tobacco, but a small packet wrapped in oilskin. "I removed this from Julian's robes while you tended the lady," he explained, unfolding it. Inside lay a lock of dark hair tied with faded ribbon, and a miniature portrait of a woman in native dress, eyes luminous with love. Chapter 7. The False Trail. For 3 days, London lay beneath a pall of snow and silence. The newspapers had feasted upon the Limehouse horror. "The bastard's revenge," screamed the headlines, until the public, sated with blood, turned to the next sensation. Julian Hargrove died in the prison hospital without regaining speech. His body was buried in quicklime within the walls of Newgate. Eleanor Hargrove vanished to the continent, taking her unborn child and the last unbroken shard of the goddess. I thought the case closed. Holmes knew better. On the 4th morning, I found him at the table, the fragments of jade now joined by a dozen fresh documents. Shipping manifests, Calcutta police reports, a dog-eared Bible in Tamil. His eyes were red-rimmed. The syringe lay untouched upon the mantel. "Watson," he said without looking up, "we have been gulled, masterfully, completely, and with a malice that would make the devil blush." I stared at him. Julian confessed. He held the kukri at Mrs. Hargrove's throat. The handwriting was forged. Holmes swept the papers together and thrust one beneath my nose. "Look at the pressure of the pen, the angle of the T-bars. Julian wrote the later notes, yes, but the first 3, the ones that began the terror, were penned by a different hand entirely. Observe the microscopic tremor of age." He sprang to the bookshelf and pulled down his indexed volume of handwritings. Within moments he had laid beside the threats a letter written in 1865 by Sir Reginald Hargrove himself. "The same flourishes on the capital S," I murmured, astonished. "Sir Reginald sent the first threats to himself?" Holmes laughed, a short, bitter bark. "No, Watson, he sent them to Thorne and Carstairs." The partners were growing uneasy. Carstairs talked of returning the idols, Thorne of confession. Sir Reginald needed a phantom to keep them silent. He invented the yellow-robed priest, posted the notes from Limehouse, even hired a lascar to play the part on moonless nights. The scheme worked brilliantly, until the phantom became flesh. He paced like a caged tiger. Julian discovered the deception in the Andaman records, Sir Reginald's own letters boasting of the ruse. Released, he determined to turn the jest into grim reality. He murdered the lascar, donned the yellow robe, and began the killings. But he was not content merely to kill. He wished the world to know his brother for the monster he was. Holmes stopped before the fire. Yet one thread remains untied. Who freed Julian from the hulks? Who provided money, forged papers, the Manchester silk? Someone in England guided his hand. A knock sounded below. Mrs. Hudson entered with a card upon a salver. "Inspector Lestrade, sir. Says it's urgent." Lestrade burst in, snow upon his boots, a triumphant grin upon his ferret face. "We've got him, Mr. Holmes, the real villain, caught red-handed trying to board the Calais packet. Name of Silas Grimshaw, Sir Reginald's confidential clerk for 20 years. Found the original plates for the threatening notes in his lodgings and a ledger showing payments to Julian Hargrove in the Andamans. Holmes took the card, but his smile did not reach his eyes. "Excellent work, Inspector. Watson and I will attend the yard at once." The moment Lestrade departed, Holmes whirled upon me. "Grimshaw is another scapegoat. Observe." He produced a second card, identical to Lestrade's but bearing a faint watermark visible only when held to the light, the crest of the Diogenes Club. "My brother Mycroft," he said grimly. "This affair reaches higher than Newgate." We took a cab to Scotland Yard through streets now thronged with Christmas shoppers. The snow had turned to slush. Costermongers bawled their wares beneath umbrellas of sacking. At the yard, Grimshaw sat in the interrogation room, gray-haired, respectable, trembling. "I never meant murder," he whimpered. "Sir Reginald promised the idols would frighten the others into silence. When Julian appeared, Sir Reginald paid me to help, to guide the boy, keep him from real harm. But Julian went mad. He killed them all, and I burned the evidence." Holmes leaned close. "Who ordered you to frame Grimshaw, knowing we would see through it?" The clerk's eyes widened. "No one, I swear." Holmes straightened. "Then you are merely the latest false trail. Come, Watson." Outside, in the crowded courtyard, Holmes spoke low. "Mycroft wishes the case buried. The partners smuggled not only gems but opium, enough to finance half the Indian trade. Powerful men in Whitehall profited. Julian threatened exposure. They used him, then sacrificed him to close the ledger." He hailed a hansom. "One last visit, the Temple of Kali, before the demolition men arrive tomorrow." We reached Limehouse at dusk. The temple stood, gutted, its altar smashed. Yet upon the wall someone had chalked fresh characters in Sanskrit. Holmes translated aloud, "The goddess sleeps, but her servants wake." Beneath the writing lay a new offering, a single ruby eye from the shattered idol, and a note in Julian's dying scrawl. Chapter 8. Gathering Evidence. The Diogenes Club after midnight is a place where even the clocks seem afraid to strike. We gained admission by means of a card Mycroft had left at Baker Street, unsigned yet bearing the single word, "Come." The porter, a man whose face might have been carved from walnut, conducted us through corridors lined with portraits of men who had ruled empires and ruined nations without ever raising their voices. Mycroft Holmes awaited us in the stranger's room, the only chamber where speech is permitted. He sat beside a dying fire, mountainous in his armchair, a decanter of port untouched upon the table. His eyes, so like Sherlock's yet infinitely wearier, regarded us with the mild curiosity of a man watching ants dispute a crumb. "You have been busy, Sherlock," he said without greeting. "Unpleasantly busy." Holmes threw hat and coat upon a chair. "3 men murdered, a 4th framed, a 5th sacrificed, and an innocent woman terrorized, all to protect the reputations of certain gentlemen who sit upon the India Council. I wonder, brother, how many more corpses you would have added to the tally." Mycroft sighed, a sound like a bellows collapsing. "You exaggerate. The Hargrove Thorn Carstairs Consortium smuggled opium worth 3 million sterling between 1865 and 1875. Half the dividends found their way into the Secret Service Fund. Had Julian Hargrove lived to speak, the government would have fallen. A few lives weighed against the stability of the empire. Elementary arithmetic." Holmes's voice cut like a rapier. "And the ruby eye left at Limehouse? The chalked warning? Your work, I presume, to keep me chasing shadows." "A necessary blind," Mycroft admitted. "The real evidence, the ledgers, the treasury warrants, the signed confessions of 3 lords of the Admiralty, lies in the cellar beneath this room. I had intended to burn them tonight. Your arrival is inconvenient." He reached for the bell pull. Holmes was faster. The revolver gleamed in his hand. "Touch that cord and I fire. Watson, the poker." I seized the heavy iron. Mycroft raised an eyebrow. You would shoot your own brother? I would shoot the man who made a murderer of Julian Hargrove and a widow of Eleanor. Stand away from the table. For a moment the room held its breath. Then Mycroft shrugged and moved aside with surprising grace for so large a man. Holmes knelt, pressed his ear to the carpet, and tapped thrice with the revolver butt. A section of the floor slid back, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. "After you, brother," Holmes said grimly. We descended into a vault lined with iron strongboxes. Mycroft struck a match. In its flare I saw shelves of documents sealed with the broad arrow of the crown. Holmes moved like a terrier among rats, selecting files with unerring precision. Here, the warrant authorizing payment to Sir Reginald for services to intelligence. Here, the minute sanctioning Julian's continued imprisonment after his sentence expired. And here, he drew forth a thin folder tied with red tape. The order for his release, signed by Mycroft Holmes, countersigned by the Home Secretary. You freed him knowing he would kill. Mycroft's face was a mask. I freed him to kill quietly. One bullet in a Limehouse alley would have sufficed. Instead, he chose theatrical vengeance. I merely adjusted the stage. Holmes gathered the choicest documents into a leather dispatch case. These go to the Times. The Empire will survive the truth. Mycroft moved with sudden speed, seizing a Webley from beneath his coat. I brought the poker down across his wrist. The revolver clattered away. Holmes covered him calmly. "Checkmate, brother." But Mycroft was smiling, thin, terrible. "Too late, Sherlock. The cellar is wired with gun cotton. One pull on the cord upstairs and this entire wing becomes a crater. The documents, all erased. The perfect accident." For the first time I saw uncertainty flicker in Holmes's eyes. Then he laughed, short, sharp, delighted. "You forget the snow, Mycroft. The roof is laden. The detonator cord runs along the eaves. A single charge from my revolver severs it." He raised the weapon and fired through the narrow ventilation slit. A muffled crack echoed outside. The cord parted, whipping away into the night like a severed artery. Mycroft's shoulders sagged. "You always were the better field agent." Holmes bound his brother's wrists with the red tape that had sealed so many secrets. As we climbed the stairs, the great man spoke once more, almost wistfully. "Tell me, Sherlock, when did you first suspect me?" "When the false trail led too neatly to the Diogenes Club," Holmes replied. "Only you could have arranged every detail. Grimshaw's arrest timed to the minute, the chalk message in perfect Sanskrit, the ruby eye placed where only I would find it. You played me like a violin, brother, but even the Stradivarius has strings that may be cut." We emerged into the stranger's room. Dawn was breaking, pale and pitiless, turning the snow on the sill to rose. Mycroft stood between us, a colossus bound. "What now?" he asked. "Now," said Holmes, "you will accompany us to Baker Street. There, in the presence of Lestrade and the Commissioner, you will dictate a full confession. The documents will be photographed and distributed to every major newspaper. You may keep your life, Mycroft, but not your silence." As we stepped into the street, the first edition of the Times was already crying the news beneath the lampposts. Chapter 9. The Model Confrontation. The clock upon the mantel had just chimed 4 when Mycroft began to speak, and the sound of his voice, measured, passionless, absolute, filled the room as completely as the smoke from Holmes's pipe had ever done. He spoke for 73 minutes without pause. Every syllable was recorded by the wax cylinder. Every syllable condemned him. He told of the secret compact of 1865, how 3 subalterns and a civilian clerk drunk on arrack and ambition had sacked the temple of the Black Mother under cover of a frontier skirmish. How the priests were bayoneted, the idols crated as curios, and the treasure, 23 lakh of rupees in gems, divided between the partners and the Secret Service Fund. He told how the fund had grown fat upon the proceeds, how half the Indian railways had been built with blood emeralds, how 3 successive viceroys had signed the warrants knowing the source. He told how Julian Hargrove, bastard and inconvenient witness, had been transported on forged evidence, how his sentence had been silently extended year after year lest he return to claim his share. And finally he told how, when the boy, now a man of 40, had escaped the Andamans and reached London, Mycroft had seen in him the perfect instrument. A ghost to frighten the living partners into silence, a scapegoat to be sacrificed when the terror grew too loud. Julian was never meant to survive the night of the 3rd murder, Mycroft concluded, voice unchanged. A constable's bullet in Limehouse would have closed the ledger. Instead, he chose melodrama. I merely adapted. Silence followed, heavier than any snow that had ever fallen on London. The commissioner, purple with rage, rose as though to strike him. Holmes laid a restraining hand upon the man's arm. Violence is superfluous, Sir Edward. The confession is complete. The documents are photographed. By morning, every editor in Fleet Street will have a set. Mycroft inclined his massive head. And I? You will resign all offices, Holmes said coldly. You will retire to the Pall Mall lodgings you keep for contemplation. You will never again set foot in Whitehall. One whisper of interference, one hint of revenge, and the full dossier goes to the Queen herself. Mycroft's eyes met his brother's across the room, gray on gray, ice on ice. You always did prefer justice to expediency, Sherlock. It will be the ruin of you one day. Perhaps, Holmes replied, but not today. The great man rose. For the first time I saw him uncertain where to place his hands. The secretaries flanked him like jailers as he moved toward the door. At the threshold he paused. The Empire is a machine, Sherlock. Remove one cog and another grinds in its place. You have won a battle, not the war. The door closed behind him with the soft finality of a coffin lid. Lestrade cleared his throat. Well, Mr. Holmes, that's the neatest piece of work I ever... Holmes cut him short with a gesture. He crossed to the window and stood looking out at the darkening street where newsboys were already crying the evening editions. Listen, he said. From below rose the shrill voices. Government scandal. Diogenes Club implicated, full confession of Mycroft Holmes. Holmes turned, and for an instant the mask slipped. I saw exhaustion, triumph, and something perilously close to grief. It is finished, Watson, he said quietly. The Victorian killer is unmasked at last. Not Julian, not Langdale, not even Mycroft alone, but the great blind machine that devours its children and calls it necessity. He reached for the violin, drew the bow across the strings once, a single aching note that seemed to hold all the sorrow of London within it, then laid the instrument gently aside. That night the snow returned, thicker than before. It fell upon the roofs of Whitehall, upon the silent Diogenes Club, upon the fresh-turned earth in Newgate churchyard where Julian Hargrove lay in unhallowed ground. It fell upon the Thames, washing away the last stains of 20 years of blood. And in our sitting room the fire burned low while Holmes sat motionless, staring into the embers where empires crumbled and rose again in crimson phantoms. I knew better than to disturb him. Some victories are too heavy to celebrate. Chapter 10. The Revelation. The city awoke to find itself transformed. From Whitechapel to Westminster, the newsboys shouted the same impossible words. Mycroft Holmes confesses, opium scandal rocks empire, resignations in Whitehall. The Diogenes Club was besieged by reporters. Hansoms queued 3 deep before its doors. In the House of Commons, questions flew like grapeshot. In the clubs of Pall Mall, old men who had ruled India with a nod now stared into their brandy as though it had turned to blood. Yet in our modest sitting room at Baker Street all was peace. Sherlock Holmes stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the sun strike gold from the frozen Thames. He had not slept. The violet shadows beneath his eyes told their own story. Upon the table lay the leather dispatch case, empty now, its contents scattered to the four winds by the presses of Fleet Street. I poured coffee. "You have done it, Holmes. The machine is broken. Mycroft is finished." He turned, and for the first time in days the familiar keen smile touched his lips. "Finished, Watson? No. Merely redirected. Mycroft will vanish to the continent tonight, ostensibly for his health. In a year he will reappear as advisor to some Balkan court, and the machine will grind on. Empires do not die of truth, they merely change their masks." He crossed to the mantel and took down the Persian slipper. From it he drew not tobacco, but a single sheet of heavy cream-laid paper, the original threatening note that had begun everything. "Observe," he said, holding it to the light. "The watermark is still perfect. The Whitechapel Mill, 1867 batch. This innocent square of rag began a chain that ended with 3 murders, 1 suicide, and the ruin of half a dozen reputations. Paper, ink, and human vanity, the eternal trinity of crime." He laid the note upon the fire. It curled, blackened, and was gone. "Yet one mystery remains," I said. "Julian Hargrove's final message, the chalk upon the temple wall. The goddess sleeps, but her servants wake. Was that mere dying delirium?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Far from it. Come." He led me to the bookshelf and drew forth a small teak box I had never noticed before. Within lay the ruby eye from Limehouse, wrapped in yellow silk. Julian's mother was not a nautch girl, Watson, but the high priestess of the Temple of the Black Mother. The idols were not mere treasure, they were the living avatars of Kaylee, carried in procession once every century. The priests swore that whosoever stole them would be hunted through every reincarnation until the goddess herself drank their blood. He turned the ruby in his fingers. It flashed like a drop of fresh heart's blood. Julian believed he was the appointed instrument, but the true servants of the goddess were never in London. They were in Darjeeling, waiting. When news of the idol's destruction reached them, carried, I fancy, by the one genuine Lascar who escaped Julian's knife, they began the long journey homeward. He replaced the ruby and closed the box. In Calcutta, 3 nights ago, the temple treasure was found unearthed and returned by anonymous hands. The Maharani's dowry restored, the idols recarved from new jade. The priests have declared the debt paid. Kaylee sleeps again, for another century. I stared at him. "You arranged it?" "A simple matter of cables and intermediaries. The emeralds purchased anonymity for certain gentlemen. The return purchased peace for the dead. Even Mycroft, in his confession, omitted that final transaction." He moved to the table where the Morning Post lay. One letter bore a Swiss crest. "From Eleanor Hargrove," he said, slitting the envelope. "She has borne a son named Julian Sherlock Hargrove. She writes that the child laughed for the first time yesterday, and the nurse swears the ruby eye upon the nursery wall glowed for an instant in the firelight." Holmes folded the letter and placed it in the dispatch box marked "Unsolved. No longer." "So the circle closes," I murmured. "Circles are illusions, Watson. There are only spirals, ascending or descending. This one has ascended. 3 murderers brought to justice, 1 innocent avenged, a woman and child given a future unshadowed by curses. Not a bad morning's work." He reached for the violin, drew the bow across the strings, and the room filled with the haunting strains of Bach's air. Outside, London went about its business. Cabs clattered, church bells rang, the great machine turned anew beneath fresh snow. I watched him play and understood at last the true revelation. That Sherlock Holmes, who had stripped away every mask from empire and brother alike, wore the only mask that mattered, the mask of the man who believed justice was worth any price, even the love of the one brother he possessed. When the final note died, he laid the violin aside and spoke almost shyly. "Watson, when you chronicle this case, and I perceive you are already reaching for your notebook, pray do not make me a hero. The Victorian killer was never one man but 1,000 compromises dressed in yellow silk. I merely held up the mirror." He moved to the window again. Far below, a small boy was building a snowman beneath the lamppost. The child looked up, saw the tall figure at the window, and waved. Holmes raised one hand in grave salute. "See, Watson," he said softly. "The new century begins. Let us hope it learns from the old." And so the case of the Victorian killer passed into history. Another strand in the rich tapestry of Sherlock Holmes's life. Another victory purchased at a price only he would ever fully reckon. The fire settled into comfortable embers. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the scars of London with the same impartial mercy it had shown for 1,000 years.